Gracious God, grant that the words of my mouth and the meditations in the hearts and minds of each and every one gathered here be made acceptable in your sight, O our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So, who was this Zacchaeus guy? Back when I was a Sunday school child, the story of Zacchaeus seemed to surface all of the time. It was a popular one. It was a favorite because as a child you have this image in your mind, this image in your head of this little rich guy, this tiny little gnome of a man with his fine linen robes and a beard fragrant with scented oil and his high-priced Gucci sandals. And this little tiny man is scampering around behind a crowd, like a child, behind the throngs who have gathered along the road to watch Jesus come past. And he's running back and forth frantically like a 7-year-old who's gotten himself into a case of Red Bull. But he cannot see a single thing. And so this little man hikes up his skirts and clambers up a tree where Jesus sees him, perched up there looking absolutely ridiculous, completely undignified. And kids love anything that makes adults look dumb. And Zacchaeus certainly looks silly here. Although if Jesus had then, hit him in the face with a pie or given him a wedgie when he came down, it would have been even more of a favorite. When you grow up, though, when you get just a little bit older, and you learn what it was that Zacchaeus did for a living, the story starts seeming a little less silly. You see, Zacchaeus was a tax collector. And that doesn't mean anything like what we would visualize as a tax collector today. And we think, all of us think of someone who collects taxes, which most of us won't be doing until about April or so. We see in our mind's eye maybe a mid-level IRS employee. Someone who spends most of their working days in a dismal little cubicle in a large windowless room with 100 other IRS employees managing the inflow of revenue for our republic. And none of us enjoy paying taxes, of course, but the folks who collect our revenue, those civil servants, get paid modest wages. And they are as honest and as hard-working, if you ever meet them, as anyone else. That wasn't the case. That was not the case back in the time of Christ, not back in the first century. Because to build its roads and its public works and to fund its very well-trained legions, the Roman Empire needed cash. And it needed to get cash in its far-off provinces. It needed to get cash from people it had only very recently subjugated. And to gather that revenue, well, they subcontracted. They subcontracted out to local networks of entrepreneurs, shall we call them. And these entrepreneurs were the ones who got to collect the taxes, got to bring in those revenue. Now, these are subcontractors. These weren't employees of the empire, and they were given pretty wide latitude to do whatever it is they needed to do to bring that money in. All Rome expected, all Rome desired, was that they would be passed along the correct amount of money for each of the citizens and residents of that area. Rome told the tax collectors, well, just make sure that we get the income that our census indicates we should receive. And after that, well, if you want to make any money, you're going to have to take a little tax on top of that tax. And we're not going to tell you how much that is. You can set that rate yourselves. And so the Roman tax collectors in Judea heard this, and they calculated out fair and progressive percentages based on people's incomes. That's what they did. right? Sure they did. Tax collectors made certain that they did as well for themselves as they could. They tacked on a high percentage as they could, because who was going to stop them? You couldn't say no to the tax collector. I mean, IRS audits might be a little unpleasant, but if you refuse to pay the taxes to the Roman Empire, the penalties were, well, they made Guantanamo Bay look like a vacation on the French Riviera. You had to pay. And so those tax collectors took whatever they could. They were universally despised for it in Judah and in all of the outlying provinces, but especially in Judah, where there was tremendous resentment against the empire. These tax collectors weren't employees of a government that more or less tries to do right. They were traitors in the service of an empire. They were profiteers. They were the worst sort of person. But Rome didn't care. And the tax collectors, who were doing quite well for themselves, didn't really mind. They were getting in a whole bunch of cash. Why should anyone care? Why should they care if the poor suffered? Why should they care that what they were doing was not fair and was not just, as long as the revenue was raised? It didn't matter how you raised it. Now, I'm a Virginian, and my home state has a lot of its own very special issues. But as I look across that river at Maryland, I have been baffled over the last 4 years since I've been working here, that there's a version of that strange imperial fundraising mindset that seems to have wormed its way into every single Maryland administration, be they Republican or Democrat, I guess if you're mixing those up. Revenues need to be raised. Everyone knows this. You've got to have revenues if you are going to pay for teachers who are well trained. You have got to raise taxes if you are going to have competent law enforcement professionals. You've got to have revenue to build the roads on which we drive, to build the schools in which children are educated, and to build the libraries in which we really should be spending more of our time. But for some reason, Americans, and Marylanders, or Americans too, last time I checked, respond to politicians who tell them that straight up front by throwing them out of office. We would rather elect a shambling Halloween zombie with a taste for brains than we would someone who honestly tells us we might need to pay a few more dollars in taxes. In Virginia, in fact, I think we have done precisely that at least 2 times in recent memory. So instead of committing political ritual suicide, Maryland leaders keep coming back to the same magical solution to all of the state's fundraising woes. And that solution, slot machines. They will miraculously fix everything. It will renew, we hear, the horse racing industry, which, as we all know, is the primary engine driving any vibrant 21st century economy. It'll fund our schools, it'll pay our cops, it'll magically fix all of those problems. And we'll have